America's debt sickness. And those folks who see the ad and instantly pivot away from either one of those issues. And remember, Jim, the punchline is, I won't vote to increase Obama's debt limit. Now, keep in mind, Jim, that the winner of this election on September 13th will finish out the last 14 or 15 months of Dean Heller's congressional term with Barack Obama as the president and Harry Reid as the majority leader of the U.S. Senate. That is a fact in terms of who takes this seat. So when I say I won't vote to increase that debt limit, and you talk about what the administration and the majority party in the U.S. Senate is proposing so far, I think that's a fair and accurate statement. But I do find it interesting that the phobia of many people on the other side of the fence is to talk about the issue that the ad was written about, which was not China. It was America's spending habits and America's debt culture.
Points well taken. And we'll talk some more, by the way, about defaulting, quote unquote, which has been somewhat demagogued. Helene in Inglewood, Florida. Hello.
Oh, good evening, gentlemen. You know, debt is one of my favorite topics. And
yes, I love it myself. The problem is I have to keep paying my debt.
Well, here's my suggestion. Okay, and I agree with the gentleman running for office that the debt was racked up by both. And when I look at Mr. Ensign and Mr. Weiner resigning for similar reasons, I'm thinking, okay, advertising campaigns. When I look at the $9 million in campaign funds for Mr. Weiner, why not an advertising campaign for every candidate running for election simply being, quote, all campaign funds will be used to pay off the national debt everyone is concerned about. What about that?
Well, for one thing, of course, you wouldn't have much of a campaign since people's message wouldn't be getting out. And for another, that all of that campaign money combined would be a bug spot on the windshield of this monster. But I'll defer to Mr. Amodei.
Well, Helene, that's an interesting concept. And since, this is a time when everything ought to be on the table, I mean, that's worthy of a thought or two in any event. I would point you to some areas that I think are ones that need to be discussed, though, in terms of going forward and changing the direction, because the direction right now is more debt and continued deficit spending, which means that 43 cents of every dollar that's being spent right now is borrowed, which is not good policy, regardless of what party you're in, I don't think. But you need to talk. I mean, a lot of people have talked about balanced budget, and that's part of the solution, but a balanced budget merely means that income needs to equal spending. And that doesn't mean you have to control spending. So if spending stays out of control, you have to raise income to meet it. That's part
of the solution. Of course, in fact, in point of fact, we actually had a balanced budget amendment with teeth in it. I can assure you, if people actually understood how much they would be paying, you would see spending slashed to the bone. People have no idea how deep we are in red ink. And personally, if it is the mood of the country that we want all of these things, we want the TARP and we want Obamacare, whatever, it may not be my mood, but my main issue is we pay for it. Because I'll guarantee you, if people actually had to, quote, pay for it here and now, they would not. They would not be spending money to patch potholes on interstate highways. More to come, and more calls as well. 1-866-50-JIMBO, as we talk with the congressional candidate Mark Amodei on the Bohannon Show here at Westwood One. Thank you for being with us on the Jim Bohannon Show with Nevada Republican congressional candidate Mark Amodei, who's run an ad that is pretty hard-hitting. But as he notes, even though the context of the ad is China, the message is certainly one that ought to resonate, I would think, with every American. More about that in a second. First, Jeff in Panama City, Florida. Good evening, Jeff.
Hey, good evening. Mr. Amodei, I'm just curious, it's kind of off the subject. There's 14 million illegal immigrants in the United States, and there's 13 million people without work. I'm a truck driver. I just come off the road for a little over a month trying to take care of my family. I was in Phoenix, Arizona. I do visit your great state quite a bit. It's a wonderful place to visit. I was in Phoenix, Arizona.
Well, he's from Nevada, actually, but...
Yeah, well, not Las Vegas. I do go through Las Vegas quite a bit.
Okay.
But I happened to be in Phoenix, and my trailer on my diesel truck, 53 foot long, was stolen by what the cameras were looking at, by obviously illegal aliens. And I was just curious, what we're going to do about that, if anything.
All right. That is certainly an issue that, if elected to Congress, Mr. Amodei will have to address, so we'll look at that as well. Are you there, Mark?
Yeah. You want me to respond to Jeff?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Not a problem. Jeff, first and foremost, when you talk about what the states ought to be doing, what the federal government ought to be doing, one of the undeniable things that is a federal responsibility is securing the borders. And so when we talk about illegal immigration, because legal immigration is a good thing, but when you talk about illegal immigration, we have on the books right now some pretty good statutes regarding securing the border that need to be enforced by the administration. But second of all, when people say, well, secure the borders, what do you mean? That's a combination of three things in my mind, Jeff, which is you have personnel resources, you have technology resources, and you have capital improvements resources. And so for that segment that you're talking about, because I assume your point of reference was Arizona, that is in Texas to San Diego. And so a renewed emphasis on that first and foremost, because if you don't secure the borders, what you do with folks inside is an ever-changing picture, if you will, if there is no static status to who's coming in. So when you talk about it generally, it's like it is undeniably a federal government responsibility to secure the borders, and that ought to be the very first priority in terms of the immigration issues.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for your call. Yes, legal immigration is a very good thing. As we go to the next call here, if I were a person who loved every government entitlement program, and I'm not quite that much on the liberal side of the spectrum, but if I were a modern day Hubert Humphrey, I would be leading the fight for fiscal responsibility because my precious programs that I care so much about are in danger of going under. I'm unable to understand why the people most in favor of all of this spending aren't in favor of doing something to at least make the country responsible enough that we can keep doing a lot of the spending. That would be their rationale, I would think, but you don't hear a lot of deficit hawks on the liberal side of things, Mr. Amodei.
Well, Jim, that's kind of one of the most interesting things, is because it's just commonsensical. It is the private sector and its health and prosperity that funds the public sector. And so if you have a sick or dying private sector, then your tax base is sick or dying. So when you hear this stuff of demagoguing the private sector, and the private sector needs to do more, and especially against, Jim, the backdrop of what is at least a recession with a capital R in this country, and I can assure you in Congressional District 2 in Nevada, there's at least a capital R on what we're going through here in this district, and you have...
Well, statewide, Nevada has the highest rate of unemployment in the country.
Well, it has a high rate of unemployment. The official rate is between 12 and 13% as we speak. But I mean, this was a state that was one of the fastest growing states in the nation for many of the last 2 decades. Actually competed with Arizona many of those years for fastest. And so growth was one of the big things that powered us. Well, from the foreclosure statistics and what's going on in the West generally, growth is gone for quite a while here. And it's time to hunker down and start talking about sustainable economic moves that can be made. And we all know that when you do that, you should look to the private sector, because if the public sector is doing that, then you need to have tax revenue to support that. So you're taking more funds from a private sector, which for sure in Nevada is ailing mightily in terms of its ability to expand what it provides in the way of federal revenue, much less state and local, at a time like this.
Here's a call from Mike in Falls Church, Virginia, on the Jim Bohannon Show. Good evening, Mike.
I could have sworn I read somewhere about private corporations sitting on trillions of dollars of reserves and just not deploying them because there's no demand out there. The people, the little people, don't have enough money to go out and create the demand to buy any corporate products. So they're just sitting on fat bank accounts. And in fact, corporate America has done very well over the last few years. It really has been the people. So I'm not understanding where criticism.
When people are out of work, and when you have companies that would like to expand cannot expand, and are instead, in many cases, contracting, I don't think that's a sign of corporate health. But I'll defer to Mr. Amodei.
Well, Jim and Mike, some of the things that business looks for is predictability and stability in terms of how they invest. Do they expand? Do they go to this location? Do they hire more people? All those sorts of things. And I think, regardless of what part of the country you're in at the moment, for the most part, predictability and stability are in very short supply. I don't know anybody who thinks it's a wonderful thing, what's going on in the stock market, the financial markets, the trade balances or imbalances, the situation in the Middle East as it affects the price at the pump, home values. I mean, predictability and stability are things that nobody, I think, is waving the flag of right now. And so I don't know whether there's people sitting on reserves or not, but I think the point has been made that when in doubt, you kind of hunker down, and I know that at least in my district, there's a lot of that going on, and for reasons that you can see on any national news broadcast or listen to on any national radio broadcast.
To Edwin in New Bern, North Carolina, on the Jim Bohannon Show with Mark Amodei. Good evening, Edwin.
Hey, good evening, Jim. Mr. Amodei, I'm a firm believer in this, okay? Hopefully, if you get elected, that we can have a system in this country that's a fair tax. For example, why can't I just give 10% of my income to the federal government, and the rest, I control my own destiny. I control my own retirement. I control my own health care. And the government, on the other hand, has to control spending and operate across the board, like people making $200,000 a year or less. If they only pay 10%, then the government needs to be on a serious diet in spending. I understand we're involved in wars and situations, but everybody in this country we have to stop saying we cannot give everybody a handout. There's a large percentage of people in this country are getting government benefits, and a small percentage of people pay into the system.
I don't.
Well, not as many pay into it as ought to. Certainly, there are many people paying in, but you're right. There are far too many people who are quite frankly parasites, and in some cases through no fault of their own, in other cases through plenty fault of their own. To be quite blunt about it, Mr. Amodei.
Well, I don't disagree with Edwin's analysis, Jim. I think the time for taking a look at how we fund this and what percentages of the population fund the federal government and what the spending priorities are is hopefully we're moving in that direction, which is why I think a lot of people are watching with great anticipation one of the milestones, which is the upcoming debt ceiling issue that's ostensibly coming to the fore within 30 days from now, and watching those negotiations. Not only do you need to talk about balanced budget, but you need to talk about spending caps that are tied to objective criteria instead of political criteria. And I think you also need to talk about supermajority votes for tax increases. Those are all part of what I think bring things back around to a more objective and accountable system whereby the federal government is answerable, and those people, those 535 folks especially, and also that person on Pennsylvania Avenue, can be more directly responsible to those folks who are, if you will, the shareholders in the country.
And, of course, having a supermajority vote for tax increases would require a constitutional amendment. I want to talk about another constitutional amendment that is somewhat highlighted by this particular race. Mark Amodei, our guest. More to come on the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO. We'll be right back here at Westwood One. Thanks for being with us on the Jim Bohannon Show. We're talking with congressional candidate Mark Amodei. Again, he is a Republican running in Nevada to fill the seat in the 2nd Congressional District after the incumbent Congressman Dean Heller left to fill the Senate seat of John Ensign. We were talking about a congressional amendment possibly to require supermajorities to raise taxes. There's another constitutional amendment, rather, that I think we ought to consider. When you have a vacancy in the Senate, the governor can appoint someone to that seat immediately, and therefore provide continuity of government. Now, if it's only one person that you're replacing, that's fine.